Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, this is your girl Cherono, all the way from Kenya. And today I'll talk about culture shock. So brace yourself. And I think this is something that no one prepared me. Like I think I've watched so many videos about like culture shock. And there are certain things about the nitty-gritties of the American system. I think we've learned about the language and all those things. Like so many of those things are like they're a bit more common. But I think there's certain aspects that just nobody prepared me for. And I have my notebook, I have my pen. I want to make sure that I talk about it in detail and I talk about it appropriately. And then mind about my outfit. I was from work today. This is my official wear, and so I just put in a bit of makeup for you guys. Yeah, but I did just spruce up a bit, something small. But yeah, welcome back to my channel. I do have my water over here. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Yeah, and I think to start off for me, I think when it comes to culture shock, I think as long as you were not born and raised in the American system, you will experience a lifetime of culture shock. It's gonna come in different forms, in different shapes, in different ways. But I think for me today I'll talk about maybe 3 major topics, maybe, and I'll separate it in terms of like either topics or sections, and that's like housing and medical. Yeah, so I think when it comes to housing, for me, one thing that nobody prepared me for this was like when you're applying for housing, like you want to rent an apartment, it's like you have to put in an application. And this is where I think it's so different between like America and any other country. Like personally, I am from Kenya. It's a country in East Africa, and I always educate people. I'm learning that I always have to educate people. Like Kenya is a country in East Africa, and that's my experience there and here. And so here it's like when you want to rent an apartment, you submit an application. It's like you are applying for a job. And how that looks like, you submit your application, you fill out information, and they will require you to provide a lot of information. And that has been my experience. I don't know, maybe it's different for different people, or it's different for different states, but my experience was that we were moving houses and we had to submit a lot of applications. And the fact that you're submitting application, it means that it can be rejected. And so here is where there's a lot of like, hey, pick me, pick us. Pick me is happening a lot when it comes to getting a house or an apartment here, especially if you're trying to find something nice. It's like you have to beg the landlord, pick us, we are the ones you want. And that can be rejected and that can be approved depending on what they are looking for. And so I think for me the weird or the interesting part was when you're doing an application for housing, is that you're putting your information, like your name, blah blah blah, all that information. But then here's where this was the culture shock for me, is that they will want to know like your work history. I'm like, what do you mean? Like I have the money, why do you want to know how I got the money? Like I could be a business person, you know. And a business person can vary in terms of how you define it. But here they were like, you have a work history, what's your, like, you see how you update your resume or your CV? That's what they want to know when you're applying for a house. So I had to put in like my previous work history, and that varies from apartment to apartment or application to application. Some of them will give you like 5 years worth of work history, or the others will go even way further. And so for me that was like, that's a bit intrusive. Like, I'm gonna give you the money, why do you want to know all that? But yeah, that for me was such a big it was such a big culture shock. Yep. And then on top of work history, they want to know your pay history. Like how much was that employer giving you at the end of the month or annually. And so at the time, like even as we speak right now, I'm barely like over 2 years in America. So you can imagine by then it was even like I was still very new. And so if I had to give my wages in terms of like I had to convert my Kenyan shillings into the American dollars, like it wasn't much. Like I was converting and I was doing annually, and it just added up to very little money. And I don't think that was going to give confidence to my landlord. So I don't know, for people who have just immigrated from other countries, especially maybe Africa, and you're immigrating to the US, I don't know how your experience has been when it comes to like justifying that your work history is strong and you have like a good money history. Like I think, yeah, that was difficult for me. Another culture shock for me, again, in the application system, they wanted to know my credit history. Like in Kenya, or I don't know, maybe I would assume in other African contexts, we don't take pride in credit. Like we run away from credit. Anything that is a loan, like anything that you will make it so that you owe somebody money, is something we run away from. Like if you're able to clear your debt, that better. But here, like if you have a good credit history, that gives you like a bigger purchasing power, not just with the housing. Not just with the housing, but also with anything that you're trying to purchase. Like it can be a car, it can be like whatever, like a big purchase. Like they want to know your credit history. At the time, I didn't even have any. I just had like a checking account, and so I was like, I have zero credit history, and so for me that was not working for me. And so we had to rely so much on my spouse's credit history for us to get an apartment. Big culture shock. Another one, I think, like once you're approved for a house, it's like you have to get like a rental insurance. It's like you're renting for an apartment, and then you have to get like insurance for it. Like this is not such a Kenyan concept, or a concept when it comes to other nationalities. Like in case of a fire, in case of a natural disaster, if something happens to the pipes and they break, it's like your rental insurance is supposed to kick in and help provide some, I don't know, some help. So for me, that was like, what, we have to pay again for the rental insurance? That was, for me, it was like, oh. Anyways, that was a big culture shock for me. And then when it comes to the lease agreement, for the lease agreement, it's like you make a commitment with your landlord or with your property manager. So back in Kenya, this is like a most case scenario, or my experience. I will talk about my experience. Like in Kenya, if you're renting an apartment, you pay for the deposit, and then you pay for your monthly rent. And then if you want to move out, you give your landlord or your property manager like either a month's notice or based on what is agreed. But most common was like a month's notice or 2 months notice, whatever that was. But here you have signed a 1-year lease agreement. There's nowhere you're going. It's like it's even longer than some relationships, some situationships that you have to stick there until the lease expires. Otherwise, I think sometimes it's based on the agreement that you have. I think some agreements can allow you to break that lease agreement, and then either you'll be required to pay a fee. I think I've seen some states will require you, for example, if you can verify that you have a good job offer that requires you to move from your apartment, they will allow you to break your lease. But breaking a lease is such a big deal. It's something that you have to negotiate with your landlord or your property manager, and they're like, hey, I want to break my lease. What does that entail? It's a process. You just can't leave. You cannot be like in a 1-year lease agreement and you want to move out in 6 months. That's something that you have to get guidance and advice from your landlord on your property manager. And that for me was such a big it was such a big culture shock. And I think thankfully with us, when we were moving, it was around the same time when we had to move because my spouse got a job offer in a different location, and he was able to negotiate around that. Even when he was getting his job offer, he was like, my lease is expiring on this time, can you allow me to start my job at this time? So he was able to renegotiate around that. But you see, that's something you have to think about. Which in Kenya, you know, if it's a 1 month, if you have to give a month's notice, and if you don't, maybe you'll have to forgo your deposits. And some people, you're like, you know what, maybe I can do that. But here, there's much consideration to be given. But that's like, I think for me, I would put those experiences in terms of good and bad. You know, it's mostly bad, but it's I don't know, it's somewhere in between. But I think one other thing that I'll say, like the houses here, which was another culture shock for me, was that, I don't know, for some people this is like, what do you mean? This is nothing. But for me, it was like the fact, like within the house, like even with the utilities, I think for me was just being able to use the tap water. And here I'll talk about water. water, water, or water in American context. And the fact that you can drink the tap water for me was like, wow, wow. Because in Kenya, or where I'm from, most of the time when you're moving into an apartment, like, you have water that is not supplied from the municipal or from the government. Like, some landlords have found a way to either drill a borehole or something, some different water source that you cannot fully trust, and so you cannot drink tap water. But here I'm like, yep, you can drink the tap water. And I think the weird bit is that some people are like, I don't like tap water because of the taste. I'm like, what taste? It's clean, I can drink it, nothing can happen to me. I'm drinking that tap water, it's free, it's coming from whatever. So for me, that was a huge culture shock. I think another huge culture shock for me around water was the fact that most of the water systems, you have the option for hot. Okay, Americans will call it hot and cold. Like, it's almost automatic in most houses, I would say. Don't quote me on this, but from my experience, like, and the houses we've lived in, like, when you go to the shower, you can shower with either the cold water, the hot water, or you can mix them up to get something warm. And that is the same with the taps. Like, if you want to brush your teeth, you can either use the hot water or the cold water, or you're in the kitchen. For me, this is the best part, because I like to do my dishes with hot water. So you have the flexibility to use that. In Kenya, or in East Africa, or in Africa, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to speak for the rest of, but in my experience in the country, I grew up in Kenya, that functionality wasn't common. Like, if you needed hot water, you would need to use either electricity or heater, like a water heater. I think for housing, there's just, I can go on and on. But the fact that a landlord needs to know your wages or has to decide that you're the best person for the house, I think in Kenya, as long as you can pay your monthly rent, nobody cares. Actually, nobody cares how you make your money, how you do what you do, whoever you are in, whoever lives within your apartment. As long as you can pay your rent, nobody actually cares about other nitty-gritties. I think when we were moving into this apartment, for example, I remember we were like 3 people on that day of the showing. It was myself and my spouse, and then we had another couple, and then I think we had another lady who came in with her mom. I think because our apartment is like on the first floor, I remember like overhearing the conversations. It's like they were not opting to live in this apartment because there was the stairs. It wasn't handicapped accessible. And so because of that, I think that's how they opted not to pick this apartment. But the other tenants, the other couple, like, they were going to be our competitors. And so for some reason, based off of all the background check that they were going to check, they were going to decide between the two of us. And for me, I'm like, I don't like this. I think something else I'll talk about is the medical aspect. The medical system in America, for me, that has been a huge culture shock. And I'll go and talk slightly, and I'm not going to be an expert, so don't quote me or whatever, but this has been my understanding. And I'll talk about the insurance, like medical cover, medical insurance. The medical insurance system here, back in Kenya, I was employed. I had a job. I had a full-time job, and my employer provided medical cover for me. It's called medical insurance. And whenever I got sick, if I needed to go to the hospital, as long as the hospital was in network or was covered by my insurance, I would walk into that hospital and I would be attended, and I would not even spend one single shilling or 1 single cent. Like, there was no money exchange. Like, I had my card, I was just swiping. I was swiping left, right, center with my medical insurance. And I think at some point it became like a virtual card. And I would show them my, it's called what, enrollment number or something, and I would be given services left, right, center. But here, you get a job and you're covered by medical insurance. Medical insurance here is very complicated. It's a scam. It's I don't know how to explain it, but it's not giving insurance. It's not giving medical coverage. For one, like I got a job. I was covered by my medical insurance, and also my spouse had a job, and so there was a time when I was covered in his insurance. But then the thing is, it's like there's something that they call like deductibles. That's such a foreign concept. It's like, based off of the plan you select, it determines what deductible amount you get. So for example, if you have a 3,000 deductible, it means that you will still spend your own money out of pocket. They call it out of pocket. You'll still spend your out of pocket money until you have utilized your deductible. And then once you have maximized on your deductible, that's when your medical insurance sets in. And also that also varies depending on the plan and the cover and the insurance, because sometimes it's like once your deductible has been covered, there's still some percentage that you have to pay. Me, I'm like, then what's coverage? I think for me that was such a big culture shock, because I'm like, if you're covering for my insurance, why am I still spending money? Like, you should cover for everything. I think with like this country, the US, with they are sophisticated and how they're developed, I think the medical side of things is so underdeveloped in many ways, and I cannot go into detail. But I think for me, that just being able to understand, like, I'm covered but I still spend money out of pocket. I don't know, we have deductible, and then we have like different PPOs, they call them PPOs, or different plans that you select, and sometimes you have to pay 10% and then insurance will cover for 90%. And then they have the technical terms where they're like, the maximum amount of money you can cover out of pocket might be 3K, 5K, depending on the plan you select. But I think the fact that I'm still spending my money somehow is a scam. And then I think I was watching a video where a lady, she was covered by insurance, and then she went for a medical procedure, and then the anesthesiologist wasn't covered, was not in network. And so all the other sections of her medical procedure was covered by insurance, but the anesthesiologist wasn't covered by insurance. I'm like, what's going on? Yeah. I think that's the one place America needs to do better. Like, what's that? That's ghetto. And I think another culture shock for me was the pharmacy system. Okay, let me give you my Kenyan context. In Kenya, if I went to the doctor and I was prescribed medication, the doctor was like, this is your medication, I would take that medication and take it to any pharmacy, any pharmacist, any pharmacy, and they would give me my medication. And sometimes maybe the pharmacist was covered by my insurance, which was highly recommended. I would go to a pharmacist that was covered by my insurance, and I wouldn't even spend anything. So my medical and my medication was fully covered. But here, you cannot do a walk-in to any pharmacy. Usually you have to select your pharmacy. So it has to be based off of maybe proximity to your physical address. And so within your physical address, you're like, what's the nearest pharmacy? And then you can decide either you can do a Walmart pharmacy or a CVS or a Walgreens, whatever, depending if it's either from a grocery store or other independent pharmacies. And so you have to select and pick one. So when the doctor is writing for you a medication, they specify which place you're going to pick your medication from. I don't know if there's an option for an open pharmacy, but that's something that I've not experienced yet in America. Maybe someone can educate me. I'm willing to learn, but here I've seen you have to go to a specific pharmacy. And then with regards to medications as well, here medications are very highly regulated. I remember back in Kenya, I used to live in an apartment building, and then on the ground floor we had a pharmacy or a pharmacist. I would go to him for all my medications. In fact, sometimes I didn't even need to go to a hospital. I would go to him and I'll give him my symptoms, and he would give me medication. And he cured 99% of the time. He was spot on, he was on point. He would give me antibiotics, he would give me any medication I needed. Except I think for a few regulated medications in Kenya, I think like morphine, a few medications are regulated, but most of them you can access through your pharmacy. And if you can afford it, the better. But here, you have to be prescribed medication. Like, you cannot do a walk into a pharmacy and be like, I need this medication. They have to be like, do you have a prescription? Do you? Where is the prescription? And they have to go to the systems and they will see the prescription. Did it come from a doctor? And I think for me that was such a big, huge culture shock. Yeah, just not being able to walk into a pharmacy and getting medication that I wanted. Another one is that with the pharmacist as well, they collect your insurance information. Back in Kenya, I would pay my pharmacist money. I'm like, hey, I have a flu, I have these symptoms. He would prescribe my medication, and then he would run the amount, and I would pay him cash or maybe a card, whatever payment that they would agree or they accept. But here, like, you have to provide your insurance information. So I don't know, for people who don't have insurance, I think there's a method to that. Maybe you say cash, but if you are going through a medical insurance system, they have to have your insurance updated, and if you switch or you something happens, it has to be updated. That for me was such a huge culture shock. I think with regards to also the medical system, which I do appreciate, which is such a positive culture shock for me, was that they take or they have taken medical history for me seriously. Like the times I have gone to the hospital, like they really take my medical history seriously. Like if I have gone to a different doctor, or if I have a primary care doctor, like they can access my medical history, or I can transfer my medical history, and that does inform them of how to, like the course of action in terms of my medication or my treatment plan, which is something for me I do appreciate. Like I think I've gone to the hospital and they have taken information about my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. Did they have these? Like I have to list all the conditions my maternal grandparents have suffered or what they died of, my paternal grandparents, and then close family members. Like they pick all that information, and that is supposed to help them provide, like to get a better sense of maybe what I've been genetically predispositioned to get. So yeah, they're usually very rigorous around getting my medical history. I think initially I struggled around sharing or getting my medical history because I was like, that was tested in Kenya. So for my first year, the times I've had to go to the hospital, if it's a gynecology, for example, they've had to run fresh tests for me. They have had to do fresh scans. They want like a most recent data or history that is like American, if that makes sense. So I think I've had to mention that I did have initially anemia, for example, but that was tested in Kenya. So they're like, no, I think we highly recommend that we run fresh tests for you, and that is something that I can either transfer from hospital to hospital, and that for me has been very useful when it comes to my treatment plan, I would say. Yeah, and I think one last thing I'll talk about with the medical system in America is that it is so expensive. I think in America you cannot afford to be sick. Why are you sick? It's like it's a crime in this country. Why are you sick? Because you go to the hospital and they run your bill. I know sometimes insurance will cover for it, but you're like, what? Like if I was to pay cash, for the medical bills that we have received, you go bankrupt. Like wow, how? Like yeah, I think for me, I would say yeah, the medical system in America, just there's so much room for improvement. As an immigrant, I feel like Kenya or other countries have a better system, but here there's something that they can borrow from. They can do a case study, or they can benchmark with Europe maybe, and see how to better improve the medical system. Because I don't know why, and people get sick, people have conditions, and you can get bankrupt. You can go broke trying to cover your medical bills. So I would say American medical system can do better for sure. Yep, and that is it for now. I think I'll continue sharing my stories. There's so many culture shock that I can break it down in terms of the corporate system, in terms of the social system, in terms of the religious system, in terms of so many systems. I've had to experience a lot of culture shock, but for me, I'm always like very curious. I go with a curious mind, just wanting to learn, wanting to understand, and I think that has made my life a bit easier. So if you want to learn more, or if you want to experience more stories, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And maybe you can let me know like what has been some of your culture shock, not just maybe in America, but in a different country. Like if you're an immigrant or you have immigrated to a different country, like what has been some of your culture shock in some of the countries that you've moved to. But thank you for keeping me company. Until next time, bye.